Sometimes, the ones who refuse to leave are the ones who hear what the rest of us can't. The hospital room sat in a quiet corner of the third floor, where the lights hummed softly and the night stretched long and still beyond the glass windows, rain tracing slow lines down the surface like time itself had grown tired of moving forward. And inside, Daniel Hayes lay unmoving beneath thin white sheets, his breathing steady but distant, as if it belonged to someone else entirely, while beside him, on the cold linoleum floor, a retired K9 named Rex kept watch without shifting, without sleeping, his amber eyes fixed not on the machines, not on the nurses who came and went, but somewhere deeper, somewhere unseen, his ears twitching at intervals too precise to be random, like he was listening to a rhythm buried beneath the silence, something faint, something just out of reach, and every few minutes he would rise slowly, circle once around the bed, then return to the same spot, pressing closer. His body tense with a purpose no one had given him, no command spoken, no signal heard, yet he obeyed it all the same, as if memory had carved instructions into his bones. And down the hall, a nurse paused, watching through the half-open door, noticing the way the dog's head tilted ever so slightly toward the empty corner near the window, the one place where nothing ever moved, nothing ever changed. Yet Rex stared at it like it held an answer, like it was calling to him in a language older than words. And outside, thunder rolled low across the sky, distant but present, echoing through the glass, and for a brief second, the monitor beside Daniel flickered, just a subtle shift, a small irregularity that could have been nothing, could have been dismissed as background noise. But Rex reacted instantly, rising to his feet, ears forward, breath held, as if he had been waiting for that exact moment, as if he had known it was coming long before anyone else. And then he let out a sound, not a bark, not quite a howl, but something in between, something raw and searching. And as it filled the quiet room, the air itself seemed to change, like something unseen had stepped closer, like the distance between here and somewhere else had grown thin. And Rex didn't look at Daniel then, not immediately. Instead, his gaze returned to that same empty corner, unwavering, patient, almost expectant, as if he wasn't alone in the room after all, and whatever he was sensing was finally beginning to answer. The sound lingered in the room long after Rex fell silent, a low vibration that seemed to settle into the walls, into the floor, into the space between each breath Daniel took. And for a moment, everything felt suspended, as if time itself had paused to listen, while Rex remained standing, his body still but alert, his gaze locked on that same empty corner, unblinking, unwavering, like he was watching something slowly take shape just beyond human sight. And the nurse at the doorway hesitated. Before stepping inside, her shoes soft against the floor, her eyes moving from the dog to the monitor, noticing the slight irregular rhythm that had not been there before, not enough to call it a change, not enough to explain, but enough to feel different. And she glanced at Rex again, the way his ears flicked forward every few seconds, responding to something she could not hear, something that did not belong to the steady hum of machines or the distant roll of thunder outside. And she lowered her voice instinctively, as if afraid to interrupt whatever unseen moment was unfolding, while Rex slowly moved closer to the bed, placing one paw gently against the frame, his nose lifting slightly into the air, drawing in a scent that did not exist to anyone else. And his tail remained still, not tense, not relaxed, just waiting, as if caught between two worlds. And outside the window, the rain began to soften, each drop quieter than the last, until the storm felt like a memory instead of a presence. And inside, Daniel's breathing shifted, so faint it could have been imagined, a subtle change in rhythm, like a distant echo returning after being lost. And Rex reacted instantly, his head lowering until it hovered inches above Daniel's hand, his breath slow and controlled, his entire body focused on that single point of contact. And then, without warning, he let out 3 short barks, precise and deliberate, the same signal he had used years ago in places far from here, places where sound meant survival. And the nurse stepped back, startled not by the noise, but by the timing, because at that exact moment, the monitor responded, a sharper line, a clearer pattern, something undeniable now, something real. And her eyes widened as she moved toward the machine, checking the readings again, then again, unable to explain how a body so still moments ago could suddenly remember how to move, even in the smallest way. And behind her, Rex did not look at the monitor, did not look at the nurse. Because he already knew, his attention returning once more to that quiet corner of the room, his ears tilting slightly as if listening to a fading voice. And for the first time since he arrived, his posture softened just enough to suggest something had shifted, something had been answered, though not fully understood. And as the room settled back into its fragile stillness, one question remained hanging in the air, unspoken but impossible to ignore. What had he heard that brought Daniel back? And why did it feel like it had not come from this room alone? The room did not return to what it had been before, even though the machines continued their quiet rhythm and the hallway lights dimmed into the deep hours of night, because something invisible had shifted its weight and left behind a presence that could not be measured. And Rex remained still beside the bed, his breathing slower now, more grounded, as if the tension that had held him upright for days had finally loosened. Yet his eyes never fully closed, not in sleep, but in a kind of watchfulness that lived somewhere between instinct and memory. And Daniel's hand, which had rested unmoving against the thin blanket, gave another faint response, a small curl of the fingers, so slight it might have been missed if not for the dog's immediate reaction, his head lifting, ears turning forward with precise focus, and he leaned in closer, pressing his nose gently against the back of Daniel's hand, holding there as if anchoring him to something solid, something real. And the nurse, now joined by a second, stood near the foot of the bed, whispering quietly as they checked the readings again and again, their voices careful, almost reverent, as though they had stepped into a moment that did not belong entirely to them. And outside the window, the rain had stopped completely, leaving the glass clear and dark, reflecting only the faint outline of the room behind it. Yet for a brief second, one of the nurses thought she saw movement in that reflection, a flicker near the corner where Rex had been staring, something that vanished the moment she tried to focus on it. And she said nothing, because there was no language for what she thought she saw, only the quiet realization that the room felt less empty than it should have. And Rex shifted again, lowering himself carefully to the floor, but this time he rested his head across Daniel's wrist, not out of exhaustion, but with intention, like a final step in a process only he understood. And his eyes softened, the sharp edge of alertness giving way to something deeper, something settled. And Daniel's breathing followed, becoming more natural, more present, as though each inhale no longer had to search for its way back. And minutes passed in that fragile stillness, until at last, Daniel's eyelids moved, not fully opening, not yet, but enough to catch the light, enough to show that something inside him was waking, slowly, carefully, like a man returning from a place too far to describe. And Rex did not react with excitement or noise. Instead, he remained exactly where he was, steady and quiet, because whatever had needed to happen had already begun, and whatever had answered his silent call had done its part. And as the first faint awareness returned to Daniel's gaze, Rex lifted his head just slightly and glanced once more toward that empty corner, his ears tilting in a final acknowledgement, as if listening to something fading away, something that no longer needed to stay. And then, for the first time since he entered the room, the dog allowed himself to rest, because sometimes the work of loyalty is not in holding on, but in knowing exactly when to let something come back on its own. Morning did not arrive all at once. It slipped quietly into the room through the edge of the window, pale and careful, as if it too did not want to disturb whatever fragile balance had been restored overnight. And the soft light settled across the floor, touching the worn fur along Rex's back, tracing the slow rise and fall of his breathing as he remained lying beside the bed, still close enough that his presence could be felt without being seen. And Daniel lay there with his eyes barely open now, not fully awake, not yet steady, but aware in a way he had not been before, his gaze unfocused at first, drifting between the ceiling and the faint reflections in the glass, as though he was searching for something he could not quite name. And when his eyes finally lowered, they found Rex, and something in his expression shifted, a recognition that went deeper than memory, deeper than thought. And his fingers moved again, this time more certain, brushing lightly against the dog's fur. And Rex responded with the smallest motion, lifting his head just enough to meet that touch, his eyes calm, steady, as if he had been waiting not for a miracle, but for this exact moment. And the nurse stepped in quietly, her voice soft as she called for the doctor. But even as footsteps gathered in the hallway and the room began to fill with quiet urgency, something remained untouched by it all, something that lingered just beneath the surface of the ordinary. And Daniel's gaze drifted again, not toward the people now entering the room, but toward that same corner where nothing had ever been, his brow tightening slightly, not in fear, but in recognition, like he was remembering a place that did not belong to this world. And for a brief second, his lips parted as if to speak, but no words came, only a slow breath that carried the weight of something unspoken, and Rex followed his gaze. Just once, his ears tilting in that familiar way, but this time there was no tension, no alertness, only a quiet acknowledgement, as if whatever had been there was no longer needed, and the space felt empty again, truly empty, the kind of emptiness that belonged to a normal room, a normal morning. Yet the feeling that something had passed through lingered like the echo of a sound too soft to hear. And as the doctor spoke in measured tones, explaining what could be seen, what could be understood, Rex lowered his head once more, resting it gently against the side of the bed, his eyes finally closing not out of exhaustion, but with a kind of peace that had not been there before. And Daniel, still weak, still finding his way back, kept his hand resting against the dog's fur, as if that connection was the only thing that felt completely real. And outside, the first clear sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the window and into the room, warm and steady, as if marking the quiet return of something that had nearly been lost. And in that light, the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt whole, as though whatever had been waiting in the dark had finally stepped aside, leaving behind only what truly belonged. The hours that followed moved gently, like a river finding its course again after being held back too long, and the room settled into a quieter rhythm, no longer defined by urgency, but by presence. As Daniel remained awake in brief intervals, his strength returning in small, careful pieces, each breath a little deeper, each movement a little more certain, and though his voice had not yet found its way back, his eyes spoke in ways words could not, lingering often on Rex, who had not left his side. Not even once, now resting more comfortably but always within reach, as if distance itself had lost its meaning between them. And when the nurses adjusted the blankets or checked the monitors, Rex would lift his head just enough to watch, not with suspicion, but with a calm awareness that seemed to measure everything against something only he understood. And Daniel noticed it. The way the dog's gaze occasionally drifted beyond the room, toward that same quiet corner, though now there was no tension in it. No urgency, only a faint curiosity, like remembering a dream that was already fading. And late in the afternoon, when the sunlight shifted into a softer gold and stretched long across the floor, Daniel's hand moved again, stronger this time, finding the edge of the bed before slowly reaching down, and Rex responded instantly, rising to meet him halfway, placing his head beneath that trembling hand with a patience that felt almost sacred. And for a moment they stayed like that, unmoving, the world beyond the room continuing on without them, while something deeper settled into place between them, something that had been tested, stretched thin, and then quietly restored. And Daniel's lips parted again, a breath forming into the shape of a word, though no sound came. Yet Rex seemed to understand all the same, his tail giving a single slow motion against the floor, not out of excitement, but acknowledgement. And in the reflection of the window, where only the room should have existed, Daniel thought he saw it again. Not clearly, not fully, just a suggestion of movement, like a shadow stepping back into the distance. And this time he did not question it, did not try to hold on to it, because somewhere within him, a quiet certainty had already taken root, telling him that whatever had stood at the edge of that space had not come to stay, but to guide, to wait, to ensure that something unfinished would find its way home. And as the light continued to fade and the first hints of evening returned, the room grew calm in a different way than before, not heavy with uncertainty, but full with a kind of peace that did not need explanation. And Rex finally lowered himself fully to the floor, stretching out with a slow, deliberate ease, his body no longer braced for something unseen, his watch complete in a way that only he could understand. while Daniel rested back against the pillow, his eyes still open, still searching, but no longer lost. Because sometimes the path back is not something a person walks alone, and sometimes it is the one who never leaves who carries the quiet knowledge of when it is time to return. Evening settled slowly, not with darkness, but with a quiet dimming of the world beyond the window, as if the day itself was stepping back to give space for something more fragile to continue unfolding. And inside the room, the rhythm had changed again, softer now, steadier, no longer washed with the same urgency by passing footsteps or whispered updates, because what needed to be seen had already been seen, and what could not be explained had already left its mark, and Daniel rested with his eyes open longer this time, awareness no longer slipping away as easily, his gaze moving with intention across the room, tracing the outlines of things that once felt distant, the edge of the chair, the faint reflection in the glass, the quiet rise of Rex's chest as he slept nearby. And there was something in that stillness that felt familiar to him, not the room itself, but the feeling beneath it, like standing on the edge of a memory that refused to fully return. And when he closed his eyes, for a moment, it came back in fragments, not images, not clear moments, but sensations, the sense of being somewhere vast and quiet, where sound traveled differently, where time did not move forward but waited. And within that space, there had been something else, not seen, but known, something that did not speak, yet held a presence that guided, patient and steady. And as Daniel opened his eyes again, his breathing slowed, as if accepting that some things were not meant to be fully remembered, only felt, only carried forward in ways that shaped what came next. And across the room, Rex stirred, not abruptly, but with a gentle awareness, lifting his head slightly, as if responding to a shift that had no sound, and his eyes met Daniel's for a brief moment, calm and certain, as though confirming that the distance between them had closed completely now, not just in body, but in something deeper that had been stretched thin and carefully drawn back together. And Daniel's hand moved again, stronger now, resting at the edge of the bed, and Rex rose without hesitation, stepping forward with quiet confidence, placing his head beneath that waiting hand once more. And this time, Daniel's fingers pressed gently into his fur, not searching, not uncertain, but knowing, and the connection held, steady and real. And for a moment, nothing else in the room seemed to exist, not the machines, not the fading light, not even the passing of time. Only that simple point of contact that had carried more weight than any words could hold. And beyond the glass, the sky deepened into a soft blue, the last light slipping away, leaving behind a calm that felt earned, not given. And Daniel's gaze drifted once more toward the corner that had once held something unexplainable. But now it was empty, truly empty. And instead of confusion, there was a quiet understanding, a sense that whatever had been there had not taken anything from him, but had returned something instead, something he could not name, yet would never forget. And Rex, sensing that shift, lowered himself beside the bed again. His body relaxed in a way that spoke of completion, of a task finished without announcement, without recognition, just as it had begun. And as the room settled into the deep calm of night once more, there was no longer a question of what had happened, only the quiet certainty that some moments are not meant to be explained, only lived. And sometimes, they are carried not by those who speak, but by those who listen long enough to hear what cannot be heard. The night carried a different kind of stillness now, one that no longer pressed against the walls but settled gently into them, as if the room itself had exhaled and decided to rest. And Daniel lay awake longer than before, his eyes adjusting to the dim light, no longer searching for something lost, but beginning to notice what remained, the quiet hum of the machines, the faint ticking of a clock down the hall, the steady presence of Rex at his side. And for the first time since he had opened his eyes, a thought formed clearly enough to hold, not a question, not confusion, but a memory trying to take shape. And though it did not come in images, it carried a feeling that was unmistakable, the sense of standing somewhere vast and silent, where the air itself seemed to listen. And within that silence, there had been a pull, not forceful, not demanding, but patient, like a hand extended without urgency, waiting to see if he would take it. And Daniel's breath slowed as he followed that feeling, letting it settle instead of resisting it. and across the room, Rex stirred again, his ears lifting slightly before his eyes opened. And for a moment, the dog did not move, did not shift, he simply watched, as if measuring something unseen, something that lingered just beyond the edges of the ordinary. And then slowly, he stood, his movement quiet but deliberate, and walked toward the same corner that had once held his attention with such intensity, his steps soft against the floor, his posture calm, no longer alert, but purposeful in a way that suggested understanding rather than reaction. And Daniel followed him with his eyes, a faint tension returning, not fear, but anticipation, like recognizing the edge of something that had not fully left. And Rex stopped a few feet from the wall, his head tilting slightly, his gaze fixed on the empty space. And for a moment, nothing happened, the room holding its breath once more, until Rex lowered his head just enough, a subtle motion, almost like a nod, and then he turned away, just like that, as if acknowledging something that had already begun to fade. And when he returned to the bedside, there was no urgency in him, no need to watch or listen as before, only a quiet certainty that whatever had been present was now gone for good. And Daniel felt it too, not as a change in the room, but as a shift within himself, like a door that had been opened just long enough to let him step back through, now gently closing behind him, leaving no trace except the understanding that it had been there at all. And his hand moved again, reaching for Rex without hesitation, and this time, when his fingers found the familiar warmth of the dog's fur, there was no searching in the touch, no uncertainty, only gratitude, steady and unspoken. And Rex leaned into it, his body relaxed, his breathing even, no longer carrying the quiet tension of waiting, because the waiting had ended, not with a moment of noise or clarity, but with something far quieter, something that did not need to be explained to be understood. And as the hours passed and the night deepened, the room remained still, but no longer empty in the way it once had been, because some spaces, once touched by something unseen, never returned to being just ordinary again. And sometimes, it is not the ones who come back who remember the most, but the ones who stayed, listening, until there was nothing left to hear. By the time the first light of morning returned again, it no longer felt like a beginning but a continuation, as if the world outside had simply waited for everything inside that quiet room to settle into place. And Daniel lay awake with a steadiness that had not been there before, his eyes clearer now, no longer drifting, no longer searching for something beyond reach, but resting on what was real, what had remained. And beside him, Rex had shifted closer during the night, his body stretched along the floor with a calm that spoke of something completed, not just a watch ended, but a purpose fulfilled in a way that did not need recognition. And when Daniel moved, even slightly, Rex responded without hesitation, lifting his head with that same quiet awareness, though now there was no urgency in it, only presence. And Daniel's hand found him again, more naturally this time, the movement no longer slow or uncertain. And as his fingers rested against the familiar warmth, a faint smile touched his face, subtle and brief, but real, as if something deep within him had finally settled. And the nurse entered softly, pausing for a moment at the doorway, taking in the scene with a kind of quiet respect, because there was something different about the room now, something she could not name, yet could feel all the same, like stepping into a place where something important had already happened and left behind a trace that lingered in the air. And she moved closer, checking the monitors, noting the steady patterns that no longer carried the same fragile edge. And as she spoke gently to Daniel, asking simple questions, guiding him back into the rhythm of the waking world, he responded in small ways, a blink, a slight nod, a breath that carried intention. And though his voice had not yet returned, there was understanding in his eyes, a quiet clarity that suggested he had come back from somewhere far beyond what anyone in that room could measure. And as the morning light spread across the floor once more, it reached the corner that had once drawn Rex's attention so completely, illuminating it fully now, leaving no shadow, no hint of anything beyond the ordinary. And Daniel glanced there, just briefly, not with curiosity, not with concern, but with something closer to acknowledgement, like recognizing a place that had once mattered and now no longer needed. 2. And Rex followed that glance for only a second before settling again, his head lowering, his body at ease, because whatever had once been there had finished what it came to do, and nothing remained but the quiet after. And as the day began to move forward, bringing with it the sounds of footsteps, distant voices, and the steady rhythm of life continuing beyond those walls, the room held onto its calm, not as something fragile, but as something earned, and Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, not from exhaustion, but from a quiet acceptance, a trust that whatever had carried him through that unseen space had also known when to let go. And when he opened them again, there was no trace of that place left in the room, only the simple truth of being here, now, with the one who had never left. And sometimes, that is all a miracle leaves behind. Not answers, not proof, but a quiet return to what matters most. Days passed not with urgency, but with a quiet unfolding, each hour adding something small, yet certain to Daniel's return, his strength building in measured steps, his voice slowly finding its way back in fragments that felt unfamiliar at first, like words borrowed from a distant place. And through it all, Rex remained exactly where he had always been, never ahead, never behind, but beside. His presence no longer marked by tension or watchfulness, but by a calm that seemed to settle deeper with each passing day. And when Daniel finally spoke clearly for the first time, his voice low and rough from disuse, the single word he chose was not a question, not confusion, but the dog's name, spoken with a quiet certainty that needed no explanation. And Rex responded not with excitement, but with a steady gaze and a soft shift closer, as if acknowledging something that had never been broken, only tested. And the room, once filled with the weight of the unknown, now carried a different kind of silence, one that felt complete rather than empty. And as Daniel sat up for the first time, guided carefully by steady hands and gentle instructions, his eyes moved again toward the corner that had once held so much unseen meaning. And though it appeared no different from any other part of the room, there was a pause in his gaze, a moment where something unspoken passed through him, not as memory, but as understanding, like the echo of a place that no longer needed to be visited to be remembered. And he did not speak of it, not to the nurses, not to the doctor, not even to Rex, because some things, once carried across, do not belong to words. And later, when the time came for him to leave that room behind, to step into the hallway and into the world waiting beyond it, Rex walked at his side without hesitation, his steps quiet and sure, as if guiding him not forward, but back to something he had nearly lost. And the sunlight outside felt warmer than before, the air clearer, every sound sharper in a way that made the ordinary feel newly given. And Daniel paused for just a moment at the threshold, his hand resting briefly against the doorframe, his eyes closing as if listening for something one last time. But there was nothing there now, no distant pull, no quiet voice, only the steady rhythm of his own breath and the familiar presence at his side. And that was enough, more than enough. And as he stepped forward, leaving the room behind without looking back, Rex followed with the same quiet certainty he had shown from the very beginning, because whatever had needed to be done had already been done. Not in a moment of noise or recognition, but in the long, silent hours when no one else had been listening. And perhaps that is how some things are meant to be, not seen, not proven, but felt in the way a life returns, in the way a bond holds steady even when everything else fades, and in the quiet truth that sometimes the ones who stay are the ones who bring us back, not by force, not by reason, but by simply refusing to leave until we find our way home.